Complaints that federally funded scientists are muzzled by the current government aren't new, but now there's an effort to attach some hard facts to those claims, the kind of objective evidence that scientists like. Democracy Watch and the University of Victoria's Environmental Law Centre are asking the Information Commissioner of Canada to investigate. Calvin Sanborn is the centre's legal director and joins us now. Hello there.
Hi, Paul.
First off, what are some examples of the government deliberately trying to restrict the flow of scientific information to the public?
Well, in the last few years, the situation has changed where government scientists used to be able to just speak to the media and then report to their superior that they've done it. But there have been new federal policies brought in that say that scientists are not free to do that, that they need to get approval. And there are policies in various departments that require them to deliver approved lines, quotes around approved lines. These responses they give have to be approved by the public relations people. And then there are specific policies at Environment Canada that say that if it's a climate change issue or an oil sands issue, that the scientist is forbidden from speaking unless they get approval right up to the Privy Council office has to give approval. And the minister has power over whether or not the scientist can speak.
There's an edict that suggests if it's specifically climate change related or tar sands related, that the Privy Council has to approve it?
The Environment Canada's policy, which is found in our report, it states that exactly. Wow. Yeah, so they're focusing in on climate change and oil sands, and then the other thing that's kind of striking is we have a case where there's a scientist that was asked a question by the media, and the response was written up by the public relations people and went to the assistant deputy minister for approval. And an email was sent to the scientist saying that your statements, as attached, are being in front of the assistant deputy minister for approval at this point. And the scientist said, those are not my statements. Like, they were actually ascribing quotes to the scientist without even letting him know. So there are a lot of explosive examples in our report.
And how is the work of the scientists being affected as a result, do you think?
Well, I think scientists are very frustrated. One of the direct results recently in the last week is that the government is now saying that international scientists must sign an agreement that gives the federal government the opportunity to veto whether or not the scientific research can be published in a scientific journal. And that has enormous implications. It means that government scientists in Canada may not be able to collaborate with scientists because American scientists are saying, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give the government of Canada a veto over whether or not our scientific research is published in Nature or Science magazine.
So if one of our scientists is on a joint international team,
that's right,
the rest of the team also has to comply.
That's right. That's what they're demanding, that they sign an agreement. And the Americans are facing a policy that is 180 degrees different than that. Like, the American government, under the Obama administration, has reversed the kind of repression of science that the Bush administration did. The American government says scientists should talk to the public. They not only allow the scientists to talk to the media and the public, they actually have a policy that says it's their obligation to share scientific information with the public, which is probably a pretty good principle in a democracy.
Now, we are talking about federal scientists here, so they're government employees, so they don't own the intellectual property for their work. They're paid for that through the federal government. Do you believe there's any room for ministerial oversight in terms of how federally funded research gets communicated to the public?
Well, I think there's room, and that the U.S. government policy is a really good example of that. That the scientists in the United States have to say that they're expressing their own opinions; they're not speaking for government. But the U.S. law is that it is not the intellectual property of the government of the day to control; that it actually belongs to the public. And I think that's a law that needs to be emulated here in Canada, because it's so essential to a democracy. Like, we can't make really smart decisions about climate change if we don't have access to the facts. And so I mean, this has been a long-standing kind of tension between government and scientists going back to Galileo. Remember, the authorities threw Galileo in prison because he kept insisting that the Earth went around the sun. But science is pretty darn important. You know, if we're going to make decisions that make sense around pollution and sea lice on fish and climate change, we can't do that without the facts. And it's very dangerous if politicians manipulate the facts.
So don't look at this research as government-owned, it's public-owned.
That's exactly right. That's the American position, and it should be the Canadian position. In a democracy, it's pretty essential.
You have filed this request with the Information Commissioner. What happens now? What are they obliged to do with this request?
Okay, so we've asked the Commissioner to conduct an investigation under Section 30 of the Access to Information Act, and then she would be issuing a report to Parliament and the public on the situation. And she doesn't have legal powers herself to change things, but she can make recommendations and report. And I'm quite confident that when she reports on this situation, that the public will demand that there no longer be this suppression of science, that people will look at this and realize the negative ramifications if taxpayers are not allowed to access the information that they paid for that may illuminate the best way of dealing with the very complex problems that our society faces.
With this complaint in, is she bound to report now?
She has the discretion to report.
Okay.
Yeah, but what we're saying is that there's no more important job for an information commissioner than to investigate a situation where there is a systematic obstruction of the public's access to publicly owned scientific knowledge.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts today. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye. Legal Director at the University of Victoria's Environmental Law Centre, that's Calvin Sanborn. Your thoughts on what he's had to say, 1-855-SHIFT-NB, that's 1-855-SHIFT-NB, or send us an email at shift@cbc.ca. Should government scientists be allowed to speak freely about the work they do for the government?